We grew 5x in 5 weeks. We had to go from 100,000 folks picking and delivering groceries to 600,000 in 4 weeks. From accounting for 5% of a grocery store sales to, in some cases, all of their sales. When COVID hit, we quickly realized we needed to stop everything else everyone was doing in the company and enter what we described as wartime. The only 2 other times the company had been in wartime was 1, when Amazon bought Whole Foods, and 2, a couple of years earlier to that but the third and probably biggest lever was we realized you could build a massive advertising business that was highly relevant to the CPG advertiser.
What was the strategy?
That's the moat, right? You do the hard work to serve customers, and then you figure out who else benefits from you serving those customers, and then find a way to have win-win commercial relationships with them. So that framework of do the hard work, who's benefiting from that hard work, and how can I then participate in that? When we talked about the role of the board member, I mentioned it's different depending on what hat you're wearing. The best thing we all can do in a boardroom is assume that everyone else is really smart.
In terms of building for the long term, how do you do something to kind of give yourself optionality?
Personally, what I've found is optionality is overrated because chances are we raised our Series C, which was at a $2 billion valuation, and we felt like we were kings of the world. Forbes magazine named us the most promising company in America. 8 months later, we went from being top of the world to really being in a pretty difficult financial situation. We were losing north of $15 a delivery. We might as well have been stapling $15 to that bag of groceries.
How did that happen? Welcome to The Peel, where we explore the world's greatest startup stories. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital, a venture capital firm that loves getting $15 stapled to my groceries. Today, I talked to Nilam Ganenthiran, founder and CEO of Beacon Software, and previously president and chief business officer at Instacart. Nilam was the 12th employee and spent over 8 years building the company. He takes us inside key moments in the business, like almost running out of money in 2015, the moments before and after Amazon acquired Whole Foods, launching Instacart's ad network, and inside its COVID response. Nilam also shares how he does customer research and builds those relationships, balancing strategy and execution, when to give up and when to keep going, how he got into angel investing, advice for serving on and managing board members, and his new company, Beacon Software. To prepare for this, I talked to 8 people who work with Nilam at Instacart and D1 Capital, and it's packed with interesting stories and lessons I think you'll learn a lot from. If you want to join the conversation, make sure to comment on YouTube or participate in the Q&A on Spotify or other podcast players. Thank you to Mark Schaff, Danny Dudek, Andrew Nodes, Chris Rogers, KJ Singh, Mike Tully, Nick Narodny, and Will Petrie for all your help. Let's jump in after a quick word from our sponsors. There's a world where your CRM is powerful, easily configured, and deeply intuitive. Attio makes it a reality. Attio is a CRM built specifically for today's modern company. It's flexible, easily configures to your unique data structures, and works for any go-to-market motion, from self-serve to sales-led. It automatically enriches your contacts, syncs your email and calendar, lets you create powerful reports, and quickly build Zapier-style automations. The next era of companies deserves more than a one-size-fits-all CRM with outdated UX. Someone recently described Attio to me as the linear of CRMs, which if you're in the know, that is high praise. Join 11 Labs, Replicate, Modal, and more. Try Attio instantly at attio.com, that's attio.com, or tap the link in the show notes and scale your company to the next level. Nilam, how's it going? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Turner. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Excited to have you. So I thought when I talked to about 10 different people that we were going to do this episode, told them, give me some topics we should dig into. I believe every single person said when Amazon announced that they were acquiring Whole Foods, that was a kind of crucible moment in your career and what you were doing. Can you kind of set the stage for what all happened there, and then we can kind of dig a little bit further into it?
Oh boy, you really you wanted to start me off on the hot seat. Well, as I mentioned, Turner, excited to be here. I think, this goes back to 2017. my wife and I had just welcomed our second child 4 days earlier. And
Wow.
I had,
I did not know that part.
Yeah, I was on the road with Apurva, our founder and CEO, and our CFO to meet a very large retailer on a Wednesday, I think it was, or we'll call it Wednesday or Thursday.
Okay.
We had one of the best meetings in Instacart's history pitching this retailer who we'd been trying to get on the platform for 5 years at that point. I remember high-fiving each other at the airport, Apurva and Ravi heading back to San Francisco, me heading back to Toronto where I lived, and just feeling like I was on top of the world because we were about to hopefully sign a very large retailer. I land in Pearson Airport in Toronto, and I get a text from my client, the CIO of Whole Foods. His name's Jason. He's now the CEO of Whole Foods. And we're on this text thread together with Apurva and John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods. He said, "Hey guys, can we connect tomorrow morning?" I gulped and I just assumed it was something bad because it was a late night text from our largest client who accounted for 43% of our GMV at the time.
With no context either.
With no context. And
chat.
it's one of those classic texts. I said, sure. We set up time to chat that next morning at 9 a.m. I grab my morning coffee, turn on the TV, hop on this conference call that they had set up. And Apurva was a bit late. I was flipping channel and they were a bit late. I was flipping channels and it landed on CNBC. And on the cron was scrolling, Amazon buys Whole Foods. I text Apurva, you got to get on. I think I know what this is about. Seconds later, he gets on. The Whole Foods founder and CEO gets on. The CIO gets on. And they basically told us the news that the world had just found out that our largest competitor was buying our largest customer. We took a moment to compose ourselves, and they reassured us that everything was going to be okay, that this won't affect our long-term partnership. We should, kind of continue to keep building. And I believed them. I believed that everything was going to be okay for that microsecond. We hung up the phone, took a deep breath, and then the text started coming. We got texts from investors, texts from employees, texts from our families. And that's when it dawned on me that things were not going to be the same anymore. We quickly gathered ourselves. We called a huddle amongst the senior-most executive team at Instacart, and we split up. We split up tasks. There was going to be a group of us that were going to deal with investors. There was a group that was going to plan out employee communications. And there was another set that was going to work on our clients and our external comms. And we got to work. We called an all hands for the company. I flew down to San Francisco that next week and presented at the all hands. And you have to remember, we had a team of, call it 320 people who's had pledged their careers with us and who were all feeling a great sense of angst about what their own futures held. They were getting questions from their parents and their spouses about, is the job that you dedicated yourself to going to amount to anything? So I got on stage and I started the conversation by saying, this is the moment we've all been waiting for. A small group of us still laugh about this because...
Did you just make that up on the spot?
I made it up on the spot, okay. Turner. But I knew that's what the team needed to hear.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, as we flash forward, that ended up being the moment that Instacart was waiting for, because that served as the catalyst for us to be able to unite the rest of the North American grocery industry to adopt digital and adopt e-commerce, and most importantly, adopt it with Instacart.
Were there any things you think you did right in terms of positioning all these stakeholders on the team, like everyone to just say, okay, this is massive. We need to just completely shift and execute on it appropriately? Like any key decisions you think that you guys made?
Yeah, I think one thing, there are probably three big things. I think the first thing is psychological and cultural. We did not allow ourselves to wallow in the pain of the moment that we were all feeling. We allowed ourselves maybe 5 minutes and then got into action mode. And I think that is something that at its best at Instacart, we had that culture. We We started from where we stand and just push forward. The second thing that we did right was we came up with language about the vision for the path forward. And this is, I think, an underappreciated strategy in moments of crisis. We worked with our board, and it was actually Sir Michael Moritz from Sequoia who we were iterating with, who came up with this. We decided to position ourselves as the friend of the retailer. And it was almost us against them, and the them being Amazon Whole Foods. And it was as much for us as it was for the external market. We needed a rallying cry to march against. And then finally, we got really surgical around prioritization. We dropped everything else that the company was prioritizing and said the most important thing now is to bring on every major grocer in North America onto Instacart, which meant if you were working on something that didn't directly service that goal, you should probably stop and ask your manager what you can be doing to service that goal.
Was there, just from a strategic perspective, why did you decide that was the best thing to do?
We had such heavy customer concentration. They accounted for so much of our volume. And frankly, Instacart wouldn't be who we are today if it weren't for that early relationship with Whole Foods Market. They were a very demanding, discerning, and high quality retailer. And we learned so much building Instacart in the early days with them. So we were comfortable with that customer concentration. But then when the transaction was announced with Amazon, you naturally have to wonder what your future holds. And hence diversifying our revenue streams became a really important thing to do.
Like it probably would have been just over the next 5 years, you were going to get there, but
correct. It was one
like a,
that's exactly right, Turner. It became one of those things that we thought naturally was just going to happen with the passage of time, but we had to become more thoughtful and deliberate about driving adoption with, we called it Main Street grocers.
So who would you kind of bucket then in that category of those big players that you got kind of signed up over the next couple of months? Any key ones?
Yeah, so I got on a plane and didn't step off for what felt like a year at a minimum, flying to all parts of the country, talking to great grocers who we had good relationships with but hadn't yet broken through with, like Kroger, like Albertsons. We expanded our partnership with Costco. We added Aldi. We scaled our relationships with some of the largest regional grocers like H-E-B, Publix, Wegmans. We signed Loblaw in Canada. So essentially, I'm forgetting the exact stat, Turner, but I think by the end of that period, we had 8 of the top 10 grocers in North America signed.
So you mentioned you had some of them kind of on board, but not fully. Like, were people dipping their toes in, maybe we should do this digital thing? Like, I don't know how they thought about it at the time, but why had people not signed up yet? And then what was the pitch to them and the urgency to them to get them to?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's almost difficult to imagine this world that wasn't that long ago, especially sitting on the other side of COVID. Today we're sitting, and grocery e-commerce is so much a fabric of how we all kind of handle our lives that we can't remember a time, I think, when grocery e-commerce was just not normalized. So the biggest consideration for these large grocers in adapting e-commerce was, is this really a thing, or is this just something for a small segment of the population?
Really?
Yeah, as crazy as that sounds. I think the Amazon Whole Foods transaction showed North America that they needed to take grocery e-commerce seriously, because these retailers are very smart and they had seen what Amazon had done for the other areas of retail as they entered and expanded from books and media to other segments. And they had too much pride of authorship. You know, many of these chains have been around for 4 generations, some 5 generations. They were not going to let what happened to a bunch of other industries in retail happen to them. So the biggest thing we had to get over was the inertia around offering e-commerce to customers. That was thing 1. Thing 2 was, are you a friend or foe? So we had to not only, sell that we were a friend, but also build product to gain trust with our retailers. And that actually led us to a bunch of innovations, including launching something that's come to be known as Instacart Enterprise, where Instacart built a set of white label products and tools and retailer enablement technology to actually help grocers come online on their own domains, with their own apps, with tools in store to be able to digitize the in-store experience as well. And you flash forward today, still remains a big part of Instacart's strategy.
So that business specifically, it's kind of like Shopify for grocery stores, or it's like vertical SaaS for running a grocer.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So that's actually how we described it at times. It actually is Shopify for groceries. And you have to remember, pre-Amazon Whole Foods, that was just not something we thought the grocery industry needed. We were a B2C marketplace that worked with grocers to get them on an aggregated platform to offer their groceries for sale to, admittedly, a pretty small group of the population at that time. Post Amazon Whole Foods, we became a retailer enablement technology provider that had a marketplace, that built white label apps and websites, that built a bunch of technology to take the grocery store and digitize it in a way that Amazon could.
And I think when I'm talking to people about this episode, we were going to have this conversation, a lot of them described you as being, I don't know the best word, but extremely customer obsessive. You were so good at understanding what your partners, customers, retailers, what they all needed. What is your approach, or what do you think is a good approach if you want to truly get to know a potential customer?
That's first of all, that's very kind. Thank you for saying that, Turner. It's a very nice thing to say. I would say I didn't grow up in sales. I think the best customer relationships are where you don't actually think of the person on the other side of the table as a customer. So my approach has always been about building relationships. And I think that's actually served me well, not just on the Instacart side, but with recruiting, with companies that I've invested in, across the board. So the way I treat my air quotes customers is the same way I treat someone who I'm recruiting. And it starts with a few core principles. The first is, I'm never going to lie to you. I may not need to tell you everything, but I'm never going to lie to you. The second is, if I don't think it's at least a medium, if not long-term win for you, I shouldn't be bringing it to you. And if I don't actually believe that, I just don't believe that zero-sum relationships are built to last. And, if you're trying to build a company over multi-decades, stuff breaks down when you're trying to optimize for the deal at hand. And then the third principle is, I want to make sure when this deal is done, we'll continue to have a relationship, even if we're both at a different company. And the thing that makes me happiest about the comment you made, which again was so kind, is I still have relationships with almost all my clients from Instacart, which makes me happy.
Yeah, that's interesting. We'll get into a little bit later what you're doing now, but maybe that'll come into play for you later in your career too. Are there any interesting stories with landing some of those deals, getting in front of customers? I was told I need to ask. So if you have any crazy examples of stuff that you did to just really get in front of people, get them to take Instacart seriously, take you seriously, and just give you the time of day.
I talk to a lot of young entrepreneurs, and, I think people often seek a silver bullet or some sort of magic answer to how to sell or how to get your first few customers. And honestly, it all comes down to the grind. So to give you an example, one of the best grocers, not just in the country, but I think in the world, is in upstate New York, and it's called Wegmans. I think they are, if you've not been to a Wegmans store, please go the next time you're in the Northeast. It's just an unbelievable experience.
What's major states or cities? Just upstate New York? Or?
So New York, Pennsylvania, DC, Maryland, Virginia, Massachusetts.
Okay, I'm trying to think if I've ever been. I don't know if I've ever been. I definitely recognize the name though.
Yeah, they the closest into New York City is in Brooklyn, which is also a great store, but smaller than the rest of their stores. The average Wegmans does, I don't know the exact stat, but probably 4 to 5 times the volume of a regular grocery store.
Why?
It's they have a broader selection. They have the nicest stuff, but they cater to a full range of socioeconomic backgrounds. Honestly, I could go spend 2.5 hours in a Wegmans. It's one of those types of experiences. You look forward to it. So I had, I've been a long-term admirer, growing up in the grocery industry, starting as a cashier at 16. I've known about Wegmans forever, and I've always wanted them on the Instacart platform. But as you'd imagine, when you have such a delightful in-store experience and you are a family-run, family-owned company that is, I think, in the 4th generation of family control now, 4th or 5th, you want people coming into your store generally because that's your point of differentiation. So getting them to adapt Instacart at first was extremely difficult. So what I would do is I had a great relationship with one of the senior leaders there who'd been there forever, and I built that relationship, frankly, by calling headquarters and just figuring out who to talk to.
Wait. So, I mean, I'm a millennial. I'm 33. That's not something I've done very often.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Cold calling is a superpower, and I think everyone. I tell my wife I want to get our kids to cold call because once you start doing it, you realize it's actually not that hard. Again, you're just having conversations with people, and people like talking to people. So anyway, I developed a relationship with this gentleman named Tom DiNardo, who's still there and is still a friend. I think the world of him. And he and I would just talk, and I'd say, Tom, the next time I'm in Rochester, I'm going to come see you. And every quarter, I would drive from Toronto to Rochester. It's about 4.5 hours. And sit in the parking lot, and then I'd text Tom or call him and say, hey, I'm outside. Can I come and see you? Most of the time, he would entertain me, and we'd have a great meeting. And the funny thing is, flash forward maybe 2 years of doing this and working with and building an understanding from Tom about what is so special about Wegmans and what needs to be different about them coming online versus every other grocer we'd done in the past, gave me the ammunition to come up with both a product as well as a proposal that made sense for them. They came online with Instacart, and frankly, they're one of Instacart's best customers even today. We invented a lot of stuff together with Wegmans that we then took to a lot of other grocers. It's one of the relationships I'm proudest of. But it probably started in the parking lot in Rochester.
So what did you do? What was the proposal or the solutions?
It's honestly so multifactorial. These are the epitome of enterprise relationships, right? The contracts are, very, very thick, and there's lots of different edge cases you're trying to solve for. Because if you think about it, what Instacart needed to solve was bring that magic of walking through the cheese aisle in a Wegmans where you've got 80 different types of cheese and someone offering you free samples. How do you bring that online? It's not just throwing up a picture of,
craft
cheese singles and you can't do that. So,
and then I heard Meijer was another interesting one.
Yeah,
met him at a trade show. What's the story there?
Yeah, Meijer. So that you're from Grand Rapids, right, Turner?
Yeah, I know some people. I have a couple friends that have been at Meijer for a long time.
Meijer was a very hard one to crack. In fact, we'd gone through the contracting process with them multiple times and got stopped at the finish line. So there were multiple times I told the company we were about to sign Meijer. We'd have an all hands getting prepared, and then something would break down at the last minute. Eventually, there is this great trade show in the grocery industry. It's called the FMI conference. And I would just go to it specifically with the goal of finding the Meijer CEO. And he was, I think, the chair of the conference. So I'd sort of wait outside the conference room where I knew he was speaking and just find a way to get to him. And I thought he forgot, but recently he told people at Instacart that he remembers me harassing him in the hallways of this conference. So, and it all worked out. We ended up bringing Meijer on board, and they're a great partner.
So I've heard too that you do a ton of research before you meet a customer. Like you get, I don't know what it is, but you just know what their problems are. You almost know it more than they do. Like, how do you do customer research? And then how do you kind of tailor your approach to kind of, in a lot of these cases, you're kind of reaching out, cold calling, showing up in front of them. Just how do you get ready for those moments?
I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Turner. I don't think of them as customers. I'm genuinely interested in their business and their story. And my wife jokes, you just like gossip. So I think of it almost as gossip, right?
Okay.
Like how many generations has this chain been in this family, and who are the folks that have been around for the ride the longest, and what is their roles beyond their titles, and what parts of the business do they enjoy doing the most? What has their career journey been? And all of that is not, I think, done the wrong way. It's a parlor trick to be able to just present facts back to a customer. But that's we're all smart. We're all human beings. People get that. That's not the intent. The intent is actually to understand what's actually important to the person on the other end of the table. Let me give you an example. If you're dealing with a public company that has had multiple rough quarters or quarters that they've gone sideways, and you get a sense that the C-suite is under the gun and needs quick sales and a quick return, that's a different pitch than if you're trying to pitch a generational company that is just focused on legacy and preservation of value created and long-term compounding. There it's about brand identity. There it's about protecting the integrity of their relationship with their customers. So understanding those nuances, I think, is pretty important.
Sounds like there's almost both of those with Instacart, where Whole Foods was public at the time.
Yeah.
And then some of these other grocers were, generational, multiple generation family businesses.
Yeah, we had, and even public companies, you can't paint them all with the same brush, right? It's the nuances around, are you a public company that
do you pay a dividend?
Exactly. Or are you a growth stock, right?
Yeah.
In the case of Whole Foods at its prime, it was a growth stock. It was valued at a higher multiple than any other grocer on the public market, so they needed to keep growing.
Yeah. So I have one other crazy story. I can't remember who brought this one up, but you apparently were on the way to a big customer meeting. I think you ended up closing them, it sounds like, but you got a flat tire.
Yes.
And what happened there?
Yeah, we were on the highway. I think it was in Pittsburgh, and one of the best parts about building Instacart was it exposed me to lots of parts of the U.S. that I would have never been to. I think I've been pretty much to every state in the country and every province in Canada, pretty much. Trying to talk to grocers or CPGs in these places, and I was in a car in Pittsburgh on the highway. And it wasn't just a flat tire, the axle broke. So we literally just dropped to the ground. It was crazy.
Was this in
scary.
A rental car or?
Yes, in a rental car.
Okay.
And when your axle breaks, you can't even move it to the side.
Can you tow it, or do you have to get picked up?
We had to get picked up, yeah. And then we got an Uber to pick us up on the highway, which was a really interesting experience. And we were all wearing suits because sometimes these are corporate environments, you have to suit up. So picture us sweating on the highway, hoping we don't get run over by a car, waiting for an Uber. I don't even think there was Uber X at the time. I think we were waiting for a Uber Black. So it was quite the scene.
Hopefully the Uber didn't cancel on you.
Yeah,
Seeing
that
the
would have
pickup
been great.
location.
Yeah, that would
I'm
have been
not doing
great.
that.
Yeah.
I've had that before. I've had 3 cancels in a row trying to get to the airport or something.
Yes,
they don't want to go.
That's
go
when
there.
you get the cancels.
Yeah. And then, any other crazy story? What's probably the most non-traditional thing you've ever done to just show up and meet someone?
Yeah, I think when we were looking for our first customer, our first grocery customer.
So this is signing them to a specific contract versus the shoppers were just going and picking up products.
Exactly. Okay. We just raised our Series A. We were testing into the model of having grocers, pay us a fee to sit on the marketplace. We had just launched Chicago, so it was September of 2013. And I had just started in the company, and we were experimenting with ways to generate revenue. So I'd fly down to Chicago, and because it was our second market, and we didn't want to experiment with anything in San Francisco, which was home base. And I'd just go try to talk to grocers, whether they were large or small. And the funniest thing was the amount of context shifting that was required. I remember, I'd have 8 meetings in a single day. I'd have a meeting with the CIO of Walgreens, and then I would get in the rental car and go to like literally a local fruit and vegetable provider called Stanley's Fruits and Vegetables, where the owner didn't want to have a smartphone because he was worried the government would be watching him.
No way. Okay.
So the context shifting of having to speak to, a traditional corporate executive, and then your next meeting, and he told me, just text me the contract terms.
Wow.
Honestly, it was a real thrill because no 2 days were the same, no 2 meetings were the same, and that's actually probably why I stayed as long as I did at Instacart. No 2 days were the same.
I think one thing that I've heard you also were pretty paramount in was just getting this whole advertising business at Instacart up and running. Can you just quickly explain to us how that worked? Because I guess it might be kind of confusing to some people. And then we can kind of get into like the nuance of it.
Yeah. So Instacart today generates hundreds of millions of dollars of profitability through ads which are served on Instacart. The vast majority of those ads are paid search products, where if you search for a keyword like cookies, Oreos may show up as the first or second item and have a little featured flag on it. And ads, so the genesis of ads was I'd been thinking about ads from the earliest days of thinking about Instacart, and I pitched the idea to Apoorva when he was starting the company. I still have the deck where long term, we always knew there would be an advertising business that was possible once you had the grocery demand on an e-commerce platform. My background, Turner, after working in grocery stores, I worked at Procter & Gamble, and I was a marketer at Procter & Gamble, trying to get people to buy soap and toilet paper.
Okay.
And diapers. And
was this just maybe we're sidetracked a little bit. So what did that consist of? Was it mostly in stores, online?
I did. Yeah. So I did. I used to sell to Walmart, almost 100% in store. Then I was the brand manager of Iams Pet Food, if anyone has pets. And from the point of view as a marketer, I always knew that if groceries came online, you could, as a marketer, it's the dream product, because then you could target customers with ads at the moment they were purchasing. So we always knew Instacart would have an ads product. The how and when, we didn't know. And little known fact is we'd been trying to do ads on Instacart since 2013. Our first ever advertisement was with a company called Hood Brands that does milk up in the Northeast. They do like dairy products. And they gave us a 50-cent coupon off anyone who would buy Hood products. I think we made all of $38 on that promotion.
Okay.
And, I think that early signal that ads weren't working had us not do ads for a long time. We came back to it in 2015, 2016. The reason advertising is such an important part of Instacart is the biggest knock on our business for the last 10 years is that no one could do grocery e-commerce profitably. Yep. We were building a business, from the ashes of Wegman and Cosmo.com. And we did 2, maybe 3 big things different. First, rather than trying to own the inventory ourselves and go direct that way, we partnered with the existing infrastructure and hence didn't need to build hundreds and thousands and now tens of thousands of warehouses. The second thing we did differently was we leveraged underutilized labor force by having them partner with us as personal shoppers using their smartphones to be able to pick and deliver groceries on behalf of grocers.
Yeah, which Webvan couldn't do.
Exactly. Mobile phones didn't exist, and the gig economy was not yet prevalent. Those 2 I think people get. But the third and probably biggest lever was we realized you could build a massive advertising business that was highly relevant to the CPG advertiser, give them great data of when they spend money on this ad, this is how many sales come back the other side. So we took our time and we built that to, what it is today.
And isn't trade spend is kind of, they don't even call it advertising historically. It's been called trade spend, where you basically, as a supplier to a store, you you kind of pay a little bit extra to get prime placement in the
Yes.
store
Yes.
on a shelf, which is kind of advertising. Like
That's right.
But it's like, to your point, it's offline. I think the thing I've heard is about 50% of it works, and the only thing is like they don't know which 50%,
so they spend the full amount.
Yep.
And, some of this was timing and luck as well. I think we were building Instacart's advertising business after Amazon had built a very successful advertising business, but not for groceries. So no one had done e-commerce ads, product placement the way that Instacart did. But Amazon had proven that model works for all kinds of other categories. And while we were already live, we learned a lot observing how advertisers interacted with that product. And that helped really bring something for grocery that made a lot of sense. And now today, everyone's got what they call retail media. Everyone's got their own. Instacart's got a giant business. Amazon's got a giant business. Walmart has a giant business around this. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what year was that, and then how big was Amazon $1 billion in ad revenue yet, or probably close?
They were pretty close. They weren't reporting it at the time, but that was what we suspected. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it was still that other bucket that was just like
yes.
randomly got really
Yes.
big, and then suddenly people are like, "Holy
Wait
cow,
a
they're
minute!
doing
Why
like
is this growing so fast?"
yeah, 30 billion
Yeah.
in ad revenue eventually, like a couple years later. That's
Crazy.
crazy. And then how did you get advertisers bought into this? Because you kind of got to kickstart this network. Like, what was the strategy? It was mostly CPG companies, correct?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. So
like
we
food
went to folks like my old employer, Procter and Gamble, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and we experimented with all kinds of different models. So as I mentioned, our first product was actually coupons. So buy, Breyer's ice cream, get 50 cents off. Customer gets a discount on the product. We get a little bit of money for serving that coupon. Then we experimented with samples. So because we had people delivering stuff to grocers, we throw in an extra. And I remember our first sample ever was something called Coca-Cola Life. If anyone remembers that, it's a green Coke. I think it's called Life, but it was a green Coke can. And we threw these samples in. It was a nice little business, but none of those were scalable in the same way as the featured product, which is a search product. I guess we stumbled upon the same thing Google had figured out many years earlier. Search is an amazing business.
Yeah. And so that's essentially what it is today.
That's the bulk of it. I think we've expanded dramatically. There's display products. I think they still do sampling and couponing, but the bulk of the business is still search.
So it's basically, if I'm Oreo or if I'm some cookie brand and somebody search cookies or chocolate chip cookies.
You want to show up first.
Yep. And so I don't have to pay if I don't want to. And people will still probably buy the product, but if I want to be at the very top.
Yes.
Yep. So it's the same business model as Facebook with the newsfeed, Google with search. I guess they're slightly different, but those are two of the most valuable companies in the world.
Right.
This is a pretty good
That's
business.
right. These are pretty good businesses. Businesses. Yeah.
Well, then when you think about it, you're it's all underpinned by you own this quote unquote shitty like logistics in person. Like that's pretty hard to get that all up and running. So then you just kind of
and that's the moat, right? You do the hard work to serve customers, and then you figure out who else benefits from you serving those customers, and then find a way to have win-win commercial relationships with them. So that framework of do the hard work, who's benefiting from that hard work, and how can I then participate in that benefiting?
Yeah, it's like the holy grail of business enterprise value creation. So then I think another big general moment of time in Instacart's history was COVID.
Oh boy. Well, we grew 5x in 5 weeks, and we were not small before COVID. So Turner, I think when COVID hit, we basically quickly realized we needed to stop everything else everyone was doing in the company and enter what we described as wartime. The only 2 other times the company had been in wartime was 1, when Amazon bought Whole Foods, which we talked about, and 2, a couple of years earlier to that, when we almost ran out of money and needed to get to profitability, unit economic profitability. So the Instacart, we were lucky in that we had the culture and mechanisms to be able to pivot the business and pivot the team to very quickly mobilize around a hard problem. And COVID was probably the hardest problem we had to solve, just like it was for everyone else operating in this environment. To give you some context on the scale, we had to go from 100,000 folks picking and delivering groceries on a weekly basis for customers, which seemed like a big number, to 600,000 in probably 4 weeks. We had to go from 1,200 agents answering customer and shopper queries in our customer and shopper service lines to 16,000 at peak. It might even be higher than that. I might be misremembering. Maybe, yeah.
1,200 to 16,000?
16,000.
Okay, so it was like a 10x increase.
That's right. I'm having flashbacks of friends texting me saying, I can't get through to the customer service line. That was because we were probably in the midst of scaling this up. We had to go from accounting for, call it 5% of a grocery store sales to, in some cases, all of their sales.
Really? Because they were probably just closed.
They were closed. Many of them were closed.
And they were relying on you to...
Absolutely. And I think as I reflect on those moments, I think about the fact that we were all holed up. Everyone was extremely scared of what was in store. And I'm just so proud that our teams were able to creatively solve problem after problem after problem to be able to get groceries to customers. And that's all the way up and down the company, down to our personal shoppers. And by problems, Turner, I think you'll remember the world ran out of hand sanitizer. So we were the first to actually go and contract with a distiller, I believe in Louisiana, to be able to get distilled alcohol and turn it into hand sanitizer. Because in some states, our personal shoppers were not allowed to deliver groceries without having hand sanitizers. Other states said you need to have masks to be able to deliver groceries. And of course, we needed our shoppers to be safe. But where do you find masks when there were no masks to be around? So we contracted with someone to stitch masks and turn cloth into masks. So these were the types of problems we were knocking down, felt like on an hourly basis. I was on the phone a lot with various city councils because one of the underappreciated parts of the COVID experience, which again, I hope none of us ever go through again, was how disjointed the regulatory and government responses were. You had federal mandates, state mandates, city mandates that sometimes were conflicting with each other. Grocery stores didn't know if they could be open and what hours they could be open. We didn't know if our shoppers could safely be there. We created an expert panel of health experts to be able to help guide us because we were not getting fulsome information from the people we thought we should be getting information from. Looking back, it was obviously I'm very proud of what we achieved because we stayed up and running. We kept the site up. We delivered, hundreds, billions of dollars of groceries on behalf of our retailers. We created jobs at a time when lots of our personal shoppers were being laid off from other hospitality industries like the hotel industry and restaurant industry. So there was a lot of good that we did, but it was really hard.
Yeah, I'm just remembering those times. It's just crazy.
Yes.
Like, it's just insane. And the thing is, we just didn't even really know the gravity of COVID. Like, there's definitely some cases where we probably overcorrected, but we kind of had to. Like, we just didn't know.
We didn't know. Yeah.
If you could go back to that time specifically, like anything you do differently, like I don't know if these are necessarily mistakes, but just like anything that you wish you could have just done a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think the big one I think about is because we became so good at stopping everything else and investing in the crisis at hand, there was a chance that we could have done a little bit more on investing in the long term while also solving for COVID. And it's easy to say in retrospect, because at the end of the day, a lot of our competitors actually were not available during that time because they might not have taken as stark a view of prioritization. But I do often wonder if we could have kept a few big projects on the burner while we were running our COVID response to make sure that in a post-COVID world, we continued to thrive. Luckily, as I look back, the business is great even today. And so it doesn't seem to have hurt anything. But that is one that I have second-guessed myself on.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, remembering back on that time. Like, I don't know how scaled the Uber groceries, DoorDash groceries.
They were not.
Yeah, Whole Foods, Amazon, I feel like didn't really have it.
They turned off
yet.
a lot of their, Amazon and Walmart didn't have the same capacity we had. They were trying the best they could, but everyone was having capacity issues.
And you were scaling up while everyone else was like, we just can't, we're just not doing it.
Yeah. I would say people, Amazon and Walmart started to catch up, call it 2-3 weeks in, but it felt like every day we were all living a week. So,
So one thing I really wanted to hit on was angel investing. You kind of at what point did you starting to get involved with some founders outside of just being an employee?
Yeah, about 4 years into my journey at Instacart, I started having people reach out to me for introductions to ask my advice. And
this
I didn't.
2017.
This is about 2017, maybe 2016, 2017, and I didn't really know what advice I had to offer.
Okay.
And I'm like, why are these people asking me?
Yeah.
And those conversations tended to be with young entrepreneurs, similar in ambition, aspiration, and skill set as Apoorva in 2012 when I started talking to him. And the great thing that gave me a lot of energy. And what I found was the day-to-day job at Instacart was so all-consuming. Just having other things to think about outside of Instacart and other people's problems to help solve was very refreshing. It almost felt like a hobby. And that led me to joining some boards to see if I could be helpful in that capacity. And more as resources allowed, investing personally in the next generation of startup.
And you even did a couple, at least one that I know for sure. You joined the board before he even raised any money.
Yes.
It sounds like he almost created the board to have you on it.
Yes. Yeah.
How did that kind of come about? And then what's the point of doing that even in the first place if there's no company yet?
Yeah, that one, that was a special founder. His name is Nick Narodny, a founder and CEO of a company called Alto. And he was introduced to me actually by a close friend, Rafael Corrales, who introduced me to Instacart. Rafa and I were neighbors at business school. Rafa was a great founder, went on to be a VC, and now is a very successful early stage VC. And Rafa introduced me to Nick really in the earliest part of the Alto journey to help Nick with thinking through marketplaces, thinking through company building. And I just fell in love with the types of conversations we were having. And I knew I wanted to be involved and help him build and scale the company. And that ended up leading to a board role and multiple rounds of financing. And
okay. And then when you're on a board, what do you usually do? Just how do you think about best practices?
I actually think it's not, this is probably an obvious statement, but in case it's not, there are different types of roles you play as a board member, depending on the type of company that you're a board member of and who you're representing. So I've had the very good fortune of being an independent board member, of being a board member who's represented a large investor from my time working at D1 Capital, and a board member sort of who served as a partner to the founder. And today obviously my time is my scarcest resource as it is for all of us, but I am fortunate to sit on the board of a great family-run retailer called Discount Tire. It's actually the largest tire retailer in America. There, my role is as an independent board member who brings insights and experiences from the outside world to support the family and the management team to ensure that Discount Tire is future-proof for the next generation. There, my role is to bring insights and experiences from what I've done to support the family and the management team to future-proof the business for the next generation. I serve on the board of the largest aviation mechanic institute in the country. It's called AIM. There, I met the chairman of the business and developed a relationship with him. And our mission there is to train the next generation of vocational trades. And I also have the opportunity to sit on the board of multiple nonprofits and the largest B2B marketplace. It's a venture-backed company called Udaan in India. So a whole diversity of boards, and my role in each is actually quite different.
So one question, this is from KJ Singh, I believe.
Is that on his board? Yes.
On his board.
Yes.
Or we're on his board?
I was on his board, yes.
Okay. One of the things he said you're pretty good at is just knowing how to communicate to all these different stakeholders. What do you think he meant by that? And then how do you think about doing that if you're a board member?
Yeah. So it all goes back to viewing people as people first and trying to understand their objectives. So when we talked about the role of the board member, I mentioned it's different depending on what hat you're wearing. And one of the things I've tried to help entrepreneurs with is thinking through that before they go into a board meeting. You've got a set of folks on the other end of the table. They all have their own objectives for that meeting. Success for them looks different depending on whether they're investors, what stage of investment they came in at, their own views of how this company fits into their career goals. And I think you have to not placate everyone, but you have to understand that so that you actually have a framework and a lens to view their comments with. Because everyone's going to be colored by their own biases coming into a boardroom, me included. And I think the job of a founder is to be able to filter through all of that to figure out, okay, I've got all your input. What is the best thing for me to do to maximize the long-term value of this business? Board members are not there to make decisions for you. They're there to help you bring in other perspectives to get sharper on the decisions you do make.
Yeah, and some of them might own all preferred shares with a lick pref. Some of them might own all common, but they're up 100x.
Yes.
But they might not get they might not clear the pref stack with
Yes.
the current value of the company. I mean, there's a lot of different cases where everyone has different opinions.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, for the founder, in most cases, this is their life's work. And definitionally, all of their eggs are in this one basket versus depending on the specific investor, it could be a part of a very large portfolio, but it's actually not about the company the investor represents. It's about that individual. Is this the company that they are banking on to make partner? And is this the thing that they want to make sure goes really well, or is it one of many?
Yeah. Is this like the thing that's going to get them promoted?
Get them a big check? Everyone's human at the end of the day.
Yeah, but then also like if they need to do something with their position in your company to their partnership, how do you arm them to better make the right decision with the rest of the team? Whether this is strategic changes we're doing, I might go against the broader group that this person's maybe a little bit junior on, thinking about all that kind of stuff too.
This may be controversial, but my approach with this is, and again, I by no means get it right myself, but what I endeavor to do is I think the best thing we all can do in a boardroom is assume that everyone else is really smart. And the reason I say that is I can't tell you the number of boardrooms I've been in where it is clear that one side has an opinion on something that is colored by certain biases, but doesn't want to expose those biases clearly before they start presenting their opinion. So even just saying things like, look, I know from my perspective, this is going to sound like it's self-serving, but X. It just lowers the defensiveness from other people around the table before you have a difficult conversation.
That's fair. And then another question, maybe it's somewhat related. I believe this is, maybe you have some experience with KJ on this, but he said, and actually you kind of talked about this a little bit with Instacart stuff, but how do you decide, you try new ideas, how do you decide between sticking with something, when you pivot, when you give up, when you keep trying something that maybe isn't quite working, but strategically it's an important thing to figure out? How do you kind of thread that needle?
Yeah. Look, I think the most obvious thing to say is you have to have a framework of decision making and you have to bring a lot of data into these types of decisions, especially around strategy shifts. That's the obvious part. What I found in practice is founders and operators need to trust their instincts. I think there's a famous Bezos line. I'm not going to get it right, but it's something along the lines of when the data and your instinct conflict, trust your instinct, or some version of that. And I think about that a lot because those are the tough decisions. That's what you get paid to do as the CEO of a company, as a founder. You're paid to make a choice when stuff is not clear, when what the right answer is not clear. So when you're thinking about a big strategy shift, seek out lots of different opinions, bring in lots of data. If it's something that you're doing in response to a competitor, really arbitrate the other side of your argument. You want to launch a new product line, take the point of view of not launching the new product line and really own that. Then just sit on it and listen to your instincts. And the reason I say that is I don't really know how cognitively this works, but I think your mind is soaking up all these inputs and is actually like processing it to get to the right answer. At least that's how I've thought about it. And most of the time that instinct ends up being what you should have done. It might not lead to the right commercial outcome, but ex post, it usually leads to the right path chosen.
So then in terms of building for the long term, how do you do something to kind of give yourself optionality while still focusing on just whatever the most strategic priority is?
Yeah, one of the things I've learned in the last few years is that I historically have overvalued optionality. Overvalued optionality.
Okay, I feel like I usually hear the opposite.
Yeah, so at Instacart, I constantly used phrases like, let's kick the can down the road so we can make the decision later, because that means you get more data, right? So that's a very well-worn strategy on like, get all the inputs. If you don't need to make the decision now, just wait because you'll get more inputs. The second well-worn strategy is pick the path that gives you the most future optionality. And I like both of those things. I'm not arguing against them. But personally, what I've found is optionality is overrated because chances are you actually don't even care about those other options. You're keeping them open just for the sake of feeling better about, and just for the sake of not making the harder decision now that you know is the right decision. The other thing I've learned is optionality actually can be a drain on your mental load as a decision maker. As a CEO, you're paid to make decisions, and there's only so many good decisions you can make in a day. And when you have something as an open decision, it's sort of looming over you, and it's taking up like bandwidth that could otherwise be used to make the option that you chose work. An undervalued part of strategy is how much of strategy is actually execution. So why not just use that brain space to execute better?
So then what is the right balance of optionality and just one main focus?
I think if the decision it's again, to use another Bezos decision framework, if it has characteristics of a two-way door decision where it's reversible without too much pain, just make a decision and move on.
Because you can just go like a week later, like,
That's
that
right.
didn't work. We're just
That's right.
not doing
a week, a month, a year later. If it is a one-way door decision, then try to keep the option open as long as possible. That's like one framework. A second framework is, will you have the option later to make a call? And if you will have the option later to launch a new product line, to enter a new geography, literally take it off the list and don't bring it up for 6 months. But if the option's going to disappear, don't fool yourself into believing that door is always going to be open. So
yeah, that makes sense. How do you figure out if it's going to be there again or not?
That's a judgment call. Yeah, it's a judgment. And that's where the data matters, right? So that's where I do think having a framework and collecting as much intel as possible, having folks have their ear to the ground about what your competitors are doing, what way the market's going, I think is super important.
All right. So one other question that I got from a bunch of people, how many red-eye flights have you taken in your life?
So a little bit of context and background. I live in Toronto with my wife and 2 kids, and I joined Instacart when our daughter Sita was born 3 weeks later. And we never moved to San Francisco because every year I thought it might be the last year for Instacart. I joined at 12 people. So I had this such fear of, something going wrong that I just never had the guts to move because I'm like, was this thing going to be around next year? Obviously, that became an irrational fear at some point in the company's journey. But as a result, we never moved our family. And I ended up traveling back and forth between Toronto and San Francisco on a pretty much weekly basis for 7 of the 8 years I was there. So to answer your question on red eyes, I flew home Thursday night almost every week for 7 years. Some of those weeks I was going other places. So it's definitely north of 200.
And I didn't want to miss this because you hit on this earlier. There was this other kind of crucible moment in Instacart's history where you had to get profitable.
Yeah.
When was that?
It was 2015.
Okay.
We had just raised our, it was a few months out. It was about 8 months later, but we raised our Series C, which was at a $2 billion valuation, $220 million round. And we felt like we were kings of the world. I believe it was Fortune or Forbes magazine named us the most promising company in America.
Wow.
And I felt like that was a little bit it's like the Madden cover.
It
was
curse,
a little bit of a
almost.
curse. Yeah. 8 months later, post that, we went from being top of the world to really being in a pretty difficult financial situation. We were losing north of $15 a delivery. So every time you ordered on Instacart, we might as well have been stapling $15 to that bag of groceries. We had pretty significant OpEx bloat. We had, the economic model was not working.
How did that happen? You just raised $220 million. I'm sure investors were like, stamp of approval, that business looks good.
Yeah. I think the big learning is it's not the job of the investors to run the company. So that stamp of approval is a moment in time validation, but you shouldn't view it as anything other than they are giving you money and to be good stewards of their money and return more money. And I think where people get tripped up is when they mistake that as something more than that. Like, we must be doing something right. No, absolutely not. The only people who can determine whether you're doing something right is your end customer. And we were, at that moment, Instacart was serving lots of customers at an increasing rate because we were growing really, really fast, which meant we were burning more money every single day.
So as you grew, you were losing more money.
That's correct.
That's like the worst case scenario.
That is the worst case scenario.
So was it because you were opening new cities, adding new shoppers and retailers?
All of the above.
The network wasn't dense enough? Or?
The whole algorithm was tuned towards growth. And we came from a time where we were coming out of a time where the capital markets were rewarding growth at all costs. And we lost the handle of how quickly we were growing, which means we lost track of burn.
So this was 8 months after the Series C, raised $220 million. How many months of runway did you have left at this kind of moment you guys realized this?
Probably 14.
14. Okay. So you had a little bit of time.
I say probably because I think it was less than that, but I think we were correcting so quickly. Imagine a leaky boat and you take as many buckets as possible and you're just trying to get the water out, right? So it probably was 8 at that moment, at that specific moment of pain.
Okay, that is pretty close.
Yeah, that's pretty
depending
close.
on how severe it was.
That's pretty close. And what we did was we had a board meeting where our board was quite surprised by the state of the company's financials and gave us some pretty real feedback about our prospects for raising more primary capital with that type of profile. And then we got to work. We looked under every couch cushion. We did the big things, we did the small things, we did the cultural things to save pennies and dollars. And we reset the company to, I think, the way it should always have been, because we're serving the grocery industry, one where pennies really matter. So examples of small things we did: people recycled their laptops. We stopped having snacks in the office. We cut the dinner service. So those things don't actually change the economic profile of a company when you've raised as much money, but culturally they send a strong signal. Some of the hardest things we did was we had to let go of a few of our team members. Very, very painful. I still think deeply about that moment. And it was a great lesson in not overhiring. Some of the big things we did were renegotiating major retailer contracts that were uneconomic, relooking at fees that we were not charging the customer for. For example, certain grocery stores charge for bags, others charge for bottle deposits. We were not collecting appropriately for those things.
So it was just kind of, the retailer was getting the money, but it was basically coming
Correct.
from Instacart,
Correct.
essentially.
So we went on a mission to take every penny in the P&L seriously. And within 6 months, we got back to unit economic profitability, and which meant every time we delivered groceries, we made money to cover headquarter expenses.
Nice. That's a pretty big shift.
That was a big shift.
Yeah, and I think to maybe put more context to it, generally when you have 8 months of runway left, that doesn't mean you have 8 months. It means you have about 2, or maybe a little bit more than that. But it's pretty grave. And then also, it's like, it's not like suddenly you go from 8 to unlimited. Like, you kind of see, okay, now we have 9, now we have 10.
That's right.
So you kind of get to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Generally, like it's not like a binary black
That's
or
right.
white. There's like a little bit of gray.
Once we were able to execute that turnaround, we went back to the investor community with a business that was growing, that was stable economically, that had a team that knew how to operate in a low margin environment. We had signed a bunch more retailers. We had started the ads business, and we were able to successfully raise a new round of capital that fueled the next chapter of Instacart's growth. So I think a big lesson for me, but also I think more broadly, is the capital markets should be thought of as an accelerant to a working business, not a bailout of a business that isn't working. So our investors treated us the right way. They forced us to get disciplined, and then they gave us more fuel to get to our next step in the ladder.
What advice would you give to Nilam in 2013 joining Instacart as employee number 12? Like someone similar to that situation, like future rocket ship, or maybe you don't know, but what advice would you give to just, nail that?
Look, there were so many things I did wrong.
Okay, like what?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything from going too fast when we should have been patient, and being too patient when we should have gone faster.
How do you decide in those moments? Like, what are the things?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from experience and just having some reps lived. One of the big, in terms of what advice, I think the thing we did right was we knew time was our most precious resource. And I think people forget that. I'm a big fan of Ramp and just the way they have the number of days since Ramp has existed. I think that's one of the coolest things, because I think people forget, like, you're default dead when you're building a startup, and you're in this race against time, and your incumbents, your competitors, they're the incumbents. They're default alive.
Yeah, they can literally not show up for a year, and the business will just kind of keep going. Exaggerating a little bit there, but
no, that's not far from the truth. And I remember obsessing about this concept when I was at Instacart, and we used to describe it as a tunnel. Okay. When would I get to the other end of the tunnel where we were default alive? And for us, it happened a few months before COVID hit, just by dumb luck. Q4 of 2019 was when we became profitable as a company. And then when COVID hits and you're profitable in every way as a company, it just ends up being a huge accelerant to your business versus anything else. It could, you do not have the luxury of taking risks. And I think, so going back, I think the big thing I'd say that we did right, and that I wouldn't change, is we knew time was our scarcest resource. In a similar vein, I think I got complacent at times when things were good. So I look at the generational companies, Microsoft, Nvidia, Facebook, Shopify, And the things that they seem to do right is they don't feel like they've won ever. It's never over. There's no tunnel. Like the entire journey is the tunnel.
It's just underground.
It's just you're underground and every day you grind hard.
Yeah.
And that's the ethos I want to do for whatever comes next.
So what is coming next?
I'm excited. A few months ago, we started a new company, Beacon Software. Beacon's focused on partnering with great vertical market software founders and entrepreneurs who have built businesses that service really specific niche markets with purpose-built software. And Beacon partners with them to bring technology, capital, and resources to bear to take those businesses, acquire them, and take them to the next level so that they can fulfill their full ambition.
So is this private equity firm, or how would you describe it?
No, we are a permanent evergreen capital vehicle. We're building a new kind of software company, but we're doing it with an acquisition first model. So we're buy and build versus I think the contrast to private equity would be that model is more focused on buy and sell.
You have an indefinite hold period?
We do.
It's kind of
yes. And I think that's part of the magic of the Beacon model. I think, frankly, thus far, that seems to be what's resonating with entrepreneurs who've spent sometimes decades building great businesses and serving their customer base. They want to make sure that their legacy is protected and enhanced.
Yeah. What are you most excited about the next, I don't know, decade? Just with everything that's going on in the world right now, anything that gets you really excited?
I'm really optimistic about the potential for generative AI to improve all of our lives. It's funny because my friends laugh. I'm generally not viewed as the most optimistic person. But on the topic of AI, I just think it's going to make my children's lives a lot easier. And I think it's going to unleash a level of human productivity that we have not seen before, clearly. Little things, one of the things we're doing at Beacon, we're an in-office model. As I'm walking around, I've asked the team to always have ChatGPT open on another window just to train themselves for whatever task they're doing, be it writing a memo, writing an email, looking at a spreadsheet, to just prompt themselves to say, can I use ChatGPT to make this easier? Because I think we're all going to have to relearn how we work. And the sooner we do it, the better. Because I think when the moment we do this, I was at another conversation with a friend where I was saying, I think I'm working more now because of AI, because I'm only focused on the fun stuff. Like before, you're doing a lot of work that felt like drudgery and like administrative tasks. I'm now getting more quickly to the fun stuff, which is the insights, the strategy, it's like all dessert.
Yeah, well, it kind of reminds me of, it's just like this new evolution of how software works and how we interact with it. So if you think about, you think of like what a investor does in Excel today, the year 2024.
Yes.
There's a lot of work that goes into it, but imagine trying to do that before a spreadsheet existed. You're like on a piece of paper trying to make these calculations. Like you can't even do that.
Yeah.
So it just completely changes how you operate.
Yeah.
So then it's like, how does AI change the way that we interact with computers and do our job? Like it will hopefully just make us more efficient.
It'll make us more efficient. And I think it'll allow us to place a premium on the thing that's always mattered. Going back to the top of the conversation, human relationships. So where is there going to be alpha going forward? I think it's in human relationships. So we should all be investing in those.
Yeah. And I like the tip too about just keeping ChatGPT open in a window. I know you told me to do that too. I've been trying to. Like it's helpful to just run it through. I think my mother-in-law does a good example. Like I think I told you we live with my in-laws, and so she has her computer up, just kind of like anytime I walk by, ChatGPT is always open.
Whoa, that's awesome.
And it's always just the asking question. She does survey research methodology. She basically like designs surveys for collecting
perfect for that,
data.
Right?
Yeah. And so she's just really good at, she was like an Amazon early adopter.
That's cool. Yeah.
97
really?
big customer.
Okay.
Yep. early Instacart customer.
That's
She's
awesome.
always an early adopter. So
That's awesome.
it's an interesting trend. I always pick. I was like, what's my mother?
What's your mother-in-law doing? Everyone
Yeah.
talks about what their kids are doing. Yeah, you've got a better.
Well, I mean, I do both.
Yeah,
It's the kids, the in-laws. You kind
Yes.
of like span the gap. My wife is always really ahead on all this stuff too.
That's
So
super cool.
sometimes they start using stuff before I do.
Yeah.
even. So I'm like,
yeah,
okay.
apparently, yeah, that's
And you know,
great.
like we talked about. I mean, I live in Michigan.
Yes.
So this is not like the tech bubble type
Yes.
people. These are
Yes.
like normal Americans.
This is
That's
the,
like,
yeah.
okay, what's the technology and the software they're using?
Yes.
You can kind of get, for me, it's kind of like my cheat code is like, okay,
Huh.
they're actually using the things that people will use because they solve a problem or make them more efficient, not just because a famous person is talking about it on
Yeah.
Twitter or like, you know, shilling it to
Yes.
start using it. So I don't know. That's kind of my unique advantage, I guess, that I have.
Exactly. You see Main Street.
Well, cool. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been an awesome conversation.
Oh, I had so much fun, Turner. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Peel. If you want to support the show, share this episode with a friend and check out our wonderful sponsor in the show notes. If you don't want to miss future episodes, subscribe to my newsletter in the show notes and you'll get new ones plus the transcripts in your inbox every week. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.
Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at ericaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.